Pacific Ocean. December 7, 1941. The world is about to change forever. A lone Japanese Zero fighter slices through the morning sky, its engine growling like a living thing. Beneath it, the turquoise waters of Hawaii shimmer, calm, unaware. The pilot's name, Shigenori Nishikaichi. He is one of 353 Japanese airmen sent to destroy Pearl Harbor, a mission of precision, vengeance, and silence. But war has a way of turning precision into chaos. After the attack, as flames rise from American battleships below, Nishikaichi's compass falters. A single miscalculation, a single gust of wind, and fate, cruel and ironic, redirects him toward a speck of green on the vast Pacific. The island of Niʻihau, unarmed, unaware, and, unbeknownst to him, American territory. What happens next is not a dogfight, not a bombing run, but a human tragedy that unfolds in slow motion. A pilot stranded among farmers, a war collapsing into confusion, and a mistake that will echo across the Pacific for years to come. The story of the man who fought, crashed, and trusted the wrong people. The story of the Japanese pilot who landed on an American base by mistake. In late 1941, Japan stood at the height of ambition. The empire's war machine stretched from China to the Philippines, from the jungles of Indochina to the steel decks of the aircraft carriers Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu. To strike Pearl Harbor was not madness, it was strategy. The plan was simple: cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet before it could interfere in Japan's expansion. 6 carriers, hundreds of aircraft, and months of secret rehearsals led to one morning of fire. Operation Z. Among the pilots assigned that morning was Petty Officer First Class Shigenori Nishikaichi, age 22. Born on Hokkaido, quiet and disciplined, he was trained to fly the Mitsubishi A6M0, the pride of the Imperial Navy. At 7:48 a.m. on December 7th, the sky over Pearl Harbor erupted. Bombs fell like iron rain. Ships burned. Alarms screamed. By 10 a.m., it was over. The U.S. Pacific Fleet lay crippled, but victory had a strange silence. Nishikaichi, flying one of the escort Zeros, was low on fuel and far from his carrier. As the formation turned back toward Japan's fleet, he realized he was lost. Radio silence was mandatory. No signals. No cries for help. He adjusted his heading, east, then south. Below him, endless ocean. Then, a miracle. An island. Camera sweeps over lush green pastures and tall grass huts. Niʻihau, the Forbidden Island. Owned privately by the Robinson family, closed to outsiders. Inhabited by less than 200 native Hawaiians. No electricity. No telephones. No news of the war that had just begun. Nishikaichi, believing the island might be friendly territory, lowered his landing gear. The Zero came down hard, skidding through a pasture, its propeller biting into the dirt, its wings snapping. The engine hissed, smoking. The islanders rushed toward the wreck. They saw a young man in a brown flight suit, bleeding but alive. He bowed politely, smiled, asked for help. They didn't know he was the enemy. The war, for them, hadn't reached Niʻihau until that very moment. Over the next hours, the villagers would feed him, tend to his wounds, and even sing for him. Unaware that just miles away, Pearl Harbor burned. But when news of the attack finally reached the island by shortwave radio, kindness turned to confusion, and confusion turned to fear. The Niʻihau Incident had begun. When Nishikaichi landed, the islanders of Niʻihau had no reason to be suspicious. They welcomed him as they would any stranger who fell from the sky, with hospitality. He was brought to a small house and given food and water. One of the locals, a man named Hawila Kaliohano, carefully took the pilot's papers and pistol for safekeeping, thinking it was the right thing to do until authorities arrived. Nishikaichi thanked him, calm and composed, but beneath that politeness, his mind was racing. He asked if there was a way to contact the Japanese consulate in Honolulu. The villagers had no idea what he was talking about. To them, Japan was a faraway country, distant and irrelevant. They told him the only ship to Oahu came once a week. As the hours passed, Nishikaichi realized something was wrong. None of the islanders seemed to know about the attack on Pearl Harbor. The morning's mission, his mission, had been a success, but here, it meant nothing. He was stranded among people who didn't yet know they were his enemies. The truth reached Niʻihau the next day, through a shortwave radio owned by one of the Robinson caretakers. The broadcast reported a Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Hundreds dead. Battleships destroyed. America at war. Silence fell over the small crowd that listened. Eyes turned toward Nishikaichi. Only then did they understand who he truly was. The friendly stranger was now a soldier of the enemy. The island had no police, no military, and no easy way to communicate with the outside world. The residents decided to hold him in the care of Benehakaka Kanahele and his wife, Ella, respected local figures known for their calm and fairness. They were told to watch him closely until help came from the main islands. But time passed. Days turned into nights. No ship arrived. No message came. The war outside their shores made the sea dangerous, and Niʻihau remained cut off. Meanwhile, Nishikaichi's anxiety grew. He needed his papers. They contained mission details, codes, and radio frequencies. He knew that if they reached American hands, they could expose vital Japanese operations. Among the islanders were 3 residents of Japanese descent, Yoshio and Irene Harada, and 1 other laborer. They had lived peacefully on Niʻihau for years, but when Nishikaichi sought their help, a sense of divided loyalty stirred within them. At first, they hesitated. But as Nishikaichi spoke to them, explaining Japan's victory at Pearl Harbor and promising that the empire would soon control Hawaii, the Harada's hesitation turned into sympathy. They began to bring him food, share information, and eventually conspire to help him reclaim his documents and radio. One night, the pilot escaped confinement with their help. They confronted Kaleo Hanno, demanding the papers. He refused and fled into the darkness with them hidden under his arm. Nishikaichi, now desperate, armed himself with a shotgun taken from the Harada's home and began searching for him. The peaceful island turned into a silent battlefield. The Kanaheles, realizing the danger, tried to reason with Nishikaichi. But when words failed, the situation exploded into violence. The pilot fired, wounding Benehakaka in the chest and hip. Despite his injuries, Benehakaka charged forward. He seized the pilot, slammed him to the ground, and held him until Ella grabbed a rock and struck Nishikaichi's head, ending the struggle. The once disciplined airman, who had flown across an ocean for his empire, died on a quiet farm on Niʻihau, killed by the very people who had once cared for him. Yoshio Harada, overwhelmed by guilt, later took his own life. His wife surrendered to the islanders. The incident, short and contained, lasted less than a week. Yet, its impact was enormous. News of the Niʻihau incident spread through military and intelligence circles. To American officials, it was evidence that citizens of Japanese ancestry could be swayed by loyalty to Japan, an event later cited as justification for the internment of Japanese Americans across the United States. A single wrong landing had become a political weapon. The death of Shigenori Nishikaichi marked the end of one story, but the beginning of another, larger one. What unfolded on Niʻihau in those few days rippled far beyond its shores. In Honolulu, U.S. Navy intelligence quickly gathered reports from survivors and locals. They pieced together the sequence of events: the crash, the hospitality, the betrayal, and the final confrontation. The incident revealed something more unsettling than the crash itself: the fear that enemy ideology could cross invisible borders, even without ships or planes. For American military leaders, this was not just an isolated island tragedy. It was a warning. If an imperial pilot could find sympathy among local residents, even a few, it raised questions about national loyalty across the entire Pacific. The Niʻihau report landed on desks in Washington, D.C. within weeks. In cold bureaucratic language, it summarized the emotional chaos of those days into one sterile sentence: the ease with which local Japanese residents aided the pilot indicates the likelihood of similar behavior elsewhere. That single line would later echo in policy rooms and political speeches. It became one of the justifications used in February 1942 when President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, authorizing the forced relocation and internment of over 120,000 Japanese Americans. One pilot's mistake had become the spark for nationwide suspicion. Back on Niʻihau, the island's peace was gone. The villagers buried Nishikaichi in an unmarked grave, far from the others. The Harada's home was left abandoned, a quiet shell of regret. Benehakaka Kanahele spent months recovering from his wounds, eventually awarded the Medal of Merit and the Purple Heart for his bravery. His wife, Ella, received official recognition as well, though both would later describe the experience not as heroism, but necessity. For them, it had never been about nations or politics. It was about survival, protecting neighbors, and stopping violence before it consumed their home. Nishikaichi's Zero fighter was salvaged piece by Navy technicians. Its wreckage was studied, photographed, and displayed, a reminder of the machine that once symbolized Japanese superiority in the air. But among the islanders, it symbolized something else: the fragility of trust. The Niʻihau Incident showed how easily war reached even the most remote and peaceful places, not with bombs, but with doubt, suspicion, and fear. For Japan, Nishikaichi was listed as missing in action, one among many who never returned from Pearl Harbor. His family received only a formal letter of honor, unaware that his final days were spent not in combat, but entangled in tragedy on American soil. For the United States, Niʻihau became a case study, cited in military reports, intelligence briefings, and later, in courtroom debates over loyalty and citizenship. What began as a navigational error had transformed into a moral and political storm. The irony was undeniable. Nishikaichi's landing, a random twist of fate, had achieved what no mission plan could. It changed how two nations viewed each other's people forever. The Niʻihau Incident faded quickly from headlines as the world plunged deeper into war. Pearl Harbor became the symbol of America's entry into the conflict, not Niʻihau. Yet, in the shadows of history, that small island held a lesson far more intimate and haunting. It showed how ordinary people, farmers, caretakers, neighbors, were forced to face impossible choices when history fell from the sky. No one on Niʻihau had sought the war, but the war found them all the same. Shigenori Nishikaichi was not a villain in the classical sense. He was a young pilot following orders, raised to believe in duty above life itself. His end on Niʻihau was not just a defeat of one man, but a quiet symbol of Japan's overconfidence, the illusion that control and precision could conquer human unpredictability. For the islanders, especially the Kanaheles, the experience left invisible scars. They had protected their community, but at the cost of their peace of mind. Each time a plane flew overhead in later years, the memory returned, the sound of the crash, the confusion, the moment hospitality turned into resistance. In Washington, the incident's legacy took a darker turn. It was used to fuel suspicion against innocent families of Japanese descent, justifying internment under the claim of national security. Thousands who had never seen Japan were uprooted from their homes, imprisoned behind barbed wire, all because of fear, amplified by the tragedy of Niʻihau. The pilot's final mistake had become an entire nation's moral one. When the war ended in 1945, the Niʻihau story slipped into footnotes and archives. The island returned to its isolation, its people to quiet lives. The wreck of the Zero disappeared into rust and soil. Only stories remained, of courage, confusion, and the terrible cost of misunderstanding. History often remembers great battles and famous generals. But sometimes, it's the small, forgotten corners of war, a single pilot, a lonely island, a week of chaos, that reveal its deepest truths. The Niʻihau Incident reminds us that war is not just fought with weapons, but with hearts, loyalties, and fear. And in the end, when the fires burned out and the echoes faded, one truth lingered. The line between friend and enemy was never as clear as the map suggested. In that silence, the island remembered everything.